My family, who abandoned me years ago, now demands that I pay for my sister's wedding. I work at a wedding ceremony company, right? It's one of those jobs where you never really know what you're going to deal with each day. Sometimes it's stressful, people are demanding, timelines are tight, and everyone wants their special day to be perfect. But there are definitely perks. I get to see the best and worst of weddings, and the upside is that I've built up a lot of connections in the industry. That comes in handy, like when I managed to help my best friend Jenny save a boatload of money on her wedding. Jenny and I go way back. We've been best friends forever, like back when I had nothing. She was the one who always had my back. There was a time when I had nowhere to go, and she practically dragged me off the street and gave me a place to stay. She's one of those friends that, when you're down, she's right there with you, making sure you're not alone. So, when she told me she was getting married, I was genuinely excited for her. I knew I had to do something special to repay even a bit of what she did for me. Now, working where I work, I've got access to all sorts of connections, caterers, florists, photographers, you name it. I've also built up a bit of a reputation, so I can get people some serious discounts. For Jenny, I wanted to pull out all the stops. I mean, this is her big day, and I know how much she and her fiancé have been saving for this wedding. I decided to call in every favor I had, from the venue manager I helped out during his crisis last year to the photographer who still owes me for that one event where I saved his butt from a lawsuit. It felt good to finally do something for someone who deserved it, so I got Jenny's costs down big time. We're talking about slashing a $20,000 wedding down to about $5,000. I know, crazy, right? But when you know the right people and have been in the game long enough, it's not impossible. I hooked her up with the perfect venue, this gorgeous garden spot that books up a year in advance. But since I know the owner personally, we managed to get it for a steal. I got the caterer, who usually charges a fortune, to give her an insane deal because I've thrown so much work his way over the years. Even the DJ cut his rate to less than half. Now, you'd think I was just doing my job, and yeah, in a way, I was, but honestly, this felt different. I mean, it's not every day you get to do this for your best friend, and I knew how much it meant to her. Jenny's one of those people who always puts everyone else first, and seeing her so happy was honestly the best feeling ever. She even teared up when I showed her the final numbers, and that's when I knew I'd done something right. Anyway, Jenny was super grateful. Being the sweet person she is, she made this big post on social media about how I saved her a ton of money and how lucky she was to have me as a friend. I didn't think much of it at the time. Just a nice post from a friend, but man, if I'd known what was coming because of that post, I might have asked her not to tag me. See, the thing is, I don't really talk to my family, haven't in years. They kicked me out when I was 16, all because I came out to them, and it was pretty much the end of the road for us after that. They didn't care if I had a place to go or if I was safe. Luckily, my aunt took me in until I was old enough to get out on my own, but still, I've kept my distance. They didn't reach out when I was struggling, so I figured they didn't deserve to be around now that I'm doing all right for myself. But the second they saw that post from Jenny, they suddenly had a lot to say. It started with my mom calling, which was already weird because she hardly ever does. When I answered, she jumped right into it. No, hi, no, how are you? Just, why didn't you help your sister with her wedding? I was like, wait, what? Because I didn't even know my sister was engaged, let alone planning a wedding. My mom started going on about how my sister was upset that I'd helped a friend instead of my own family. It was like they just decided to forget about all the years they'd ignored me. I tried to keep my cool, but it was honestly tough. The hypocrisy was off the charts. They kicked me out when I was a teenager, left me to fend for myself, and now they expect me to drop everything and help out like nothing happened? I told my mom straight up that I wasn't about to apologize for helping Jenny. I told her that Jenny had been there for me through thick and thin, and she deserved it. My mom didn't take that well. She started yelling about how family should come first and how I owe it to my sister to help her. At this point, I was done with the conversation, so I told her that wasn't happening and hung up. I figured that would be the end of it, but oh man, I was wrong. The next day, I started getting messages from extended family, people I hadn't heard from in years, all acting like I was the worst person on the planet for not prioritizing my sister. It was insane. Everyone was suddenly trying to guilt trip me, saying how they thought I'd changed and how I should put the past behind us. Like, really? Where were these people when I was homeless, crashing on couches, and trying to figure out where my next meal was coming from? It's one thing for them to call and text, but my sister, she took it to a whole other level. She tried calling me non-stop, leaving these long voicemails accusing me of choosing strangers over blood. She even dragged my dad into it, who, by the way, has never been there for me. I ignored most of the calls because I didn't have the energy for that drama, but I knew this wasn't the end of it. My family never lets things go that easily. Later, Jenny called to check in because she'd seen some of the comments my sister left on her post. She was worried that she'd stirred up trouble for me, but I told her not to worry. She didn't do anything wrong, and honestly, if my family wanted to make a big deal out of this, that was on them. It wasn't like I was going to let them bully me into giving my sister a free wedding just because they suddenly decided they needed me in their lives. Still, I could feel the headache brewing. I knew this was just the beginning, and knowing my family, they weren't going to drop it anytime soon. I just didn't know how far they'd go to try and get what they wanted. So, after my phone blew up with calls and messages from my mom, my sister, and a bunch of random relatives, I figured they'd eventually cool down. Like, I thought they'd realize they were being ridiculous and just let it go. Yeah, wishful thinking on my part. My family doesn't work that way. They don't let things slide until they get exactly what they want. Anyway, a couple of days later, I'm at work, and everything's going fine. I was in the middle of coordinating this outdoor wedding, making sure the florist had the arrangements right, when I got a call from my boss. She's usually pretty laid back, so when she told me she needed to see me in her office ASAP, I knew something was up. I got there, and she looked serious. She told me that someone called the company claiming to be my family. I immediately knew who it was. Who else could it be? Apparently, my sister called, and she wasn't just trying to chat. She told my boss that it was unfair that I used my connections to get a discount for a friend instead of family. She said it was favoritism and that I was playing favorites at the company's expense. Can you believe that? She tried to guilt trip my boss into pressuring me to help her out with her wedding instead of Jenny's. My boss, to her credit, didn't buy into any of it. She just listened to my sister's nonsense, politely told her that company policy doesn't allow us to interfere in employees' personal relationships, and hung up. But still, my boss wanted to make sure I was okay, and she warned me that if my family tried anything else, she might have to get HR involved. I was both relieved that my boss had my back and super embarrassed that my sister had the audacity to pull something like this. It's one thing to yell at me over the phone, but to drag my job into it? That's a whole new level. After I left my boss's office, I was fuming. Like, who does that? Who thinks it's okay to go after someone's job just because they didn't get their way? I took a deep breath and tried to focus on work, but the whole time, my mind was racing. I knew my sister was entitled, but this felt personal. It was like she was determined to mess with everything I'd built just because I wouldn't give her what she wanted. Later that night, I went home and started getting texts again. This time from some old high school friends and distant relatives I hadn't heard from in years. And guess what? They were all sharing my sister's posts on social media, where she was trashing me for being selfish and not helping family. She wrote this whole rant about how I had turned my back on blood and how she couldn't believe her own brother would betray her like this. And people were eating it up. I had folks messaging me, saying things like, "Hey man, family is family. You should really make things right, and, your sister needs you right now. Why are you acting like this?" It was so infuriating. These people had no clue what really went down. They didn't know about how my family left me out to dry when I was a teenager. They didn't know about the nights I spent couch surfing and scraping by, while my sister had everything handed to her. But now that I'm doing all right and have a decent job, suddenly I'm the bad guy for not handing out favors left and right. I tried to ignore it, but it was getting out of hand. My inbox was flooded, and my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. I ended up logging out of all my social media accounts for the night because it was just too much. I needed to clear my head, and dealing with their drama was the last thing I wanted. The next day, though, things went from bad to worse. I was at work again, setting up for another wedding, when I got a text from a coworker saying my mom and sister had shown up at the office. At first, I thought they were joking, but then I saw the security footage. Yep, there they were, standing at the front desk, demanding to speak to me. I didn't even know what to do. Part of me wanted to just hide in the back and pretend I wasn't there, but I figured that would just make things worse. So, I walked up to the lobby, and the second my sister saw me, she started yelling about how she couldn't believe I was betraying my own family. My mom was right there beside her, backing her up, saying how she didn't raise me to be so heartless. It was like a full-on intervention right there in my workplace. I tried to stay calm, but the whole situation was embarrassing as hell. People were walking by, staring at us, and I could see my boss watching from her office. I told my mom and sister that this wasn't the place to have this conversation, and that they needed to leave, but my sister just kept going, saying how I owed it to her to make things right, and that if I didn't, I was no longer part of the family. At that point, I'd had enough. I told them flat out that I wasn't going to help with her wedding, and I wasn't going to risk my job just because they suddenly decided they wanted me back in their lives. I said if they really cared about family, maybe they should have shown it when I was a teenager instead of kicking me out. That shut them up for a second, but then my sister tried to play the victim card again, saying, "I'm trying to fix things between us, and this is how you repay me." I couldn't believe the nerve. Fix things? By ambushing me at my job? I told her that if she was serious about mending our relationship, this was not the way to do it. But honestly, at that point, I didn't care. I was done. I turned around and walked away, leaving them standing there. I could hear my sister yelling something as I left, but I didn't look back. Security had to escort them out, and I could feel the eyes of everyone in the office on me. It was humiliating. After they left, I went back to my desk and tried to focus on work, but it was impossible. All I could think about was how my own family had tried to mess with my job just because they didn't get what they wanted. I was angry, but I was also hurt. I kept replaying the conversation in my head, and each time it just made me more frustrated. I'd worked so hard to get where I am, and the people who were supposed to be my family couldn't care less. When my shift ended, my boss called me into her office again. She told me she was sorry for what happened and assured me that she wouldn't let it affect my position. But she also said I needed to keep my personal life separate from work. I understood, and I thanked her for having my back. But as I left her office, I realized something. I was going to have to make some serious decisions about my family because if they were willing to pull this stunt now, what else would they do if I didn't give in? So, after that disaster at work, I thought things might calm down a bit. I mean, they'd already pulled just about every trick in the book to try and guilt me into paying for my sister's wedding, but I guess I underestimated just how determined they were. Turns out they weren't done making my life miserable. A few days later, I got a message from an old friend, one I hadn't talked to in years. She sent me a screenshot of my sister's latest social media post. My sister had written this long rant, complete with pictures of me and her growing up. She painted this sob story about how I was turning my back on family and ruining her special day. She even mentioned that she'd reached out to my boss because she had no other choice since I wouldn't do the right thing. It was like she was trying to make herself look like the victim while throwing me under the bus. The worst part was seeing all the comments under her post. People who didn't know any better were taking her side, calling me all sorts of names, and saying how awful it was that I wouldn't support my own sister. I couldn't believe the audacity. Like, seriously, these people knew nothing about what actually happened. They had no clue that my family had kicked me out when I was a teenager or that my sister hadn't spoken to me in years, until she needed something. Now, I've got a pretty thick skin, but seeing that stuff did get to me. It's one thing to have your family treat you like garbage, but it's another to have strangers join in on the hate when they have no idea what's really going on. I tried to brush it off, but it was tough. Every time I logged onto my social media, there were more messages, and it felt like everyone was trying to drag me into some kind of drama I wanted no part of. Then, about a week later, I got home from work and found this package waiting for me on my doorstep. I thought it was weird. Because I wasn't expecting anything, I was a bit surprised to see the package waiting for me on my doorstep. It had my name on it, so I opened it. Inside, there was a wedding invitation, my sister's wedding invitation. But of course, it wasn't just any regular invite. She had written a note on the back in big, angry letters. The note said something like, "I hope you can finally see what you've done. You've ruined my wedding, but there's still time to fix it. I need you to step up, and if you don't, everyone will know what kind of person you really are." I sat there staring at it, trying to wrap my head around how she could be so entitled. Like, she had already trashed me on social media, showed up at my job, and now she was leaving guilt trip messages in my mailbox? I knew my sister was used to getting her way, but this was a new level. It felt like she was trying to manipulate me into giving in, and the pressure was getting worse every day. At this point, I was seriously over it. I decided to block my sister and my mom on everything: calls, social media, texts, everything. I just wanted some peace and quiet, and I figured if they couldn't reach me, they'd eventually move on and leave me alone. But of course, nothing's ever that simple when it comes to my family. A couple of days later, I was having a normal day at work when my phone started blowing up again. This time, it was friends from work messaging me, saying they'd seen another post from my sister. I didn't even need to check it to know it was more of her drama, but one of my coworkers sent me a screenshot anyway. This one was even worse. She had posted about how tragic it was that she couldn't afford her dream wedding dress and how she was heartbroken because her own brother refused to help her, despite being in a position to make it happen. She added all this stuff about how she'd been forced to downgrade her wedding because of my selfishness, and people in the comments were just eating it up. It was like they all forgot how social media worked, and they were acting like they knew the whole story based on one post. At this point, it was getting harder to ignore. My inbox was filling up with angry messages from people I didn't even know, some of them even threatening me, calling me a disgrace and an embarrassment to my family. It was honestly getting out of hand. And then, to top it off, my mom called me from a different number, one I didn't have blocked. I was so close to letting it go to voicemail, but I answered, hoping maybe she was ready to talk sense. Thank you very much for watching to the story so far. I suggest you to subscribe to the channel so that you don't miss tomorrow's stories.